What's up 3D designers, welcome to this new video. Today we actually want to take the crystal that we created in the last video and we want to shade it and prepare it for rendering, and we are going to do this inside of Blender. So I would say without further ado we can just jump right into Blender. So I've got my Blender scene right here. If you followed along with the last video, you should have something similar to this, maybe a little different depending on how much you played with the settings that I told you in the last video. Yeah, so I would say we can just start with the main crystal, with the shading of this. So I will just turn on the preview, or actually the rendering flag is even better. So that's what we will create today, this effect right here. I can show you it in camera view, this crystal. And let's start with the shading. So for this base crystal, I have the materials right here. This is what the material looks like. Actually, let me turn on the render flag back again. So this is what it looks like. We just have a simple color. I turned on a little bit of subsurface scattering. I thought it looked cool. And no metallic, of course, because a mineral, obviously you don't need any metallic. Specular just at 0.5, okay. Then just a little bit of roughness. No surface is completely flat, so we always need a little bit of roughness. That's why we crank this up just a little bit. And the important part, of course, is to have some transmission. Otherwise, you couldn't see through it. So we turn up transmission all the way. And I also added some imperfections. As you can see, we have those scratches on the surface. This just makes the whole scene look a lot more realistic. What I did here is I imported a image texture. So I have my image right here, which is called scratches.jpg, and it's just an image I downloaded from the internet. It really doesn't matter which image you take. The important thing is that it's like black and white, and you can choose a PBR texture, or you can just search for a texture online and yeah, just take whatever random image. In my case, this image was this right here, so that's what I used for my scratches, because I wanted to have those like sort of longer scratches on the surface of the crystal. And yeah, we're basically taking the color output of this and we're feeding it into the a bump node. And this bump then goes into the normal input slot of our principled shader. And that means that we basically have this fake displacement, and I also take it into the real displacement. And I just made this thing right here as an alternative, so you can choose if you want to use real displacement or if you just want to use bump. Of course, it also depends on how close you want to get to the object, because if you only use bump and you zoom up really close to the object, of course, at a certain point you might see that it's not really displacement, and that's why you can also just use the normal displacement. So with that being said, that's already like the basic surface of our main crystal. And now we can take a look at the stone below. So this is the stone texture. It's a little more complex, but also like nothing to worry about. It's actually pretty simple once you get the hang of it. So we are starting out with a noise texture, because I just wanted to add some imperfections on the rock. And yeah, you can just like play around with those settings on the noise texture. I then took the color input, the color output of this noise, and I plugged it into a color ramp, and then plugged it into the roughness. So basically this color ramp is just adjusting whatever node is coming before it. And that's like with those sliders you can basically adjust the effect of our noise texture. Again, it's just personal preference on how you wanna set those sliders up. Just play around with it and feel free to experiment. Okay, this is going into the roughness. Then we also have some bump. So I'm taking the factor into the height and just plugging this into the normal. And again, I just set up a bump and a displacement. You can use both of them, which doesn't make really a difference, but or just use either of them depending on the use case that you have. So displacement, of course, you have to also play with the scale. If we have this at default 1, this is of course going to be a little too much. So I'm just going to set this back again. And one important thing, if you use displacement, you have to go into the material settings and actually go to settings, and you have to set displacement to displacement and bump, or displacement only, or of course bump only if you're only using bump. But otherwise, if you use displacement, this won't work. So it will only then show the bump if you have it set to bump only. Okay, so that's that. I think, yeah, okay, we obviously have a base color, so you can make your stone, of course, a different color, play around with it. I wanted this crystal also to be metallic, like I thought it looked just a little cooler if it was like partially metallic, so there are certain minerals that have this kind of look, and that's what I was going for in this case. Yeah, and I think that's it for the material on here. If you remember, in the last video we also created those little bubbles. In my case, let me zoom in if we can see them. So those little bubbles, I think you should be able to see them. I just had the same texture as the main crystal on them because I just exported them out of Houdini inside of one object. So this crystal and the bubbles were one part. I just didn't bother to create an extra texture for those bubbles because they are like so tiny and you can't really see the amount of detail that's on there. Okay, so now I think the shading is almost done, but one thing that I want to show you, what we didn't cover in the last video. So I actually refined the crystal a little more by adding some smaller crystals on top of the stone. I just thought it looked pretty cool, and therefore I created those 3 particle systems. I can just quickly show you the objects that I modeled before that. So I just quickly modeled 3 crystals, like really basic. It's just with doing some basic beveling. So you just create, for example, a cylinder with 8 sides, and then you bevel the vertices to get those cut off corners, and you have those really basic little crystals. I then did 3 variations of them in size, and you can then feed those into the particle system of our stone. And that's what I did right here. Particle settings number 1 right here are the big ones, those are the medium ones, and then we have, if I turn this on, we have just really small ones. I thought it looked very cool if there would be like sort of those baby crystals on top of the stone, and it made the whole thing look a lot better. That's what it looks like. So you basically have all those other crystals scattered around on top of the stone. And one thing to note here is if you're running into the problem that your crystals, if you're using the particle system, are basically inside of the crystal, where inside of the big crystal, where you don't want to have them, you only want to have them on the outside, or at least I wanted to have this because otherwise it wouldn't be as realistic. You can just like paint in with either in vertex paint mode or in weight paint mode. You can then use this group that it creates in order to set it as the density. So I created a vertex group, I think, and so you just basically are painting in those areas where you want to have crystals, and that's where they will be scattered. And of course it's important to set this to hair. I think with that being said, we are already at the end of this tutorial. I really hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you learned something from it, and thanks for watching.